I'm talking to Lisa Bero at the Population Health Congress in Hobart. Lisa, could you just tell us your background, please?
So I'm a pharmacologist. I currently work at the Charles Perkins Center at the University of Sydney as a chair of medicine use and health outcomes.
And you've been talking here today in the Wicked Problems session of the Population Health Congress about the influence of industry on public health research, and we know that it's been in the news lately. How do research reports that are sponsored by industry compare with others?
So what we've found is that if the research is funded by a corporate sponsor, it's much more likely to have a finding that supports the sponsor's product, whatever that might be. And we've seen that across a variety of fields: tobacco, pharmaceuticals, nutrition, environmental risk assessment.
And how does that actually happen? Aren't facts facts?
So what's interesting is it doesn't happen because the methods of the studies are necessarily different. So we can see a difference in the outcome of the studies because the question asked may be slightly different. There may be something going on behind the scenes about how the study was conducted. And also the study may only get partially published, and only the favorable part might get published.
So how do you detect that? How do you monitor it?
We have to look at basically very large numbers of studies, and we have to assess the risk of bias in the studies, and then look at the association of the results with the funder. And in fact, we do this in a quantitative way.
And the impact, what is the impact on what? On public health research, and in fact on public health? Can you quantify it?
Well, it skews the public health literature in certain directions depending on the topic you're asking. And so what can happen is we see that research that reports a risk of a certain product, for example, might not appear in the scientific literature. It might have been suppressed. Or that research that says a product is efficacious or not harmful will appear in the scientific literature. And so that just means it's harder for public health researchers to find the true story. They can't always rely exactly on what's published in the literature.
Now, one of the things you raised was that disclosure is not enough. Why not?
Well, all of the work we've done demonstrating bias has been based on the disclosures that are on the papers in the scientific literature. And so we know that disclosure doesn't prevent bias. And also there's some really elegant work in economics that shows that when you have a disclosure, it actually makes people more biased in their advice. So transparency is very important, but it's necessary and not really sufficient to manage the conflict.
That's interesting. Is there a reason why that would make them more biased?
No, I don't know. These have been randomized control trials, and there's two theories. One is that people feel that if they've warned someone that they have a conflict, they can, be more free with their thinking. And then the other is that perhaps people with those conflicts just are more biased. So we don't know the reason, it's just what the experiments show.
So obviously the tobacco industry has been a big spotlight on this over the years, but have what we learned from tobacco, has that taken us somewhere else? And what have been the things that have been done in the past that are good, and what do we need to do?
Well, I think we've made a lot of progress. One is there is greater transparency, and it's not just about who's funding a study now, but people are often having to disclose what the role of the sponsor was. So did they actually help you write it, or did they actually help you devise the research question? The other thing is I think people are more skeptical now about these studies because there's been a lot of research in this area. And we also have registries of studies now, so we can more easily find unpublished data. And there are some new models for funding research.
And you raised a couple of examples of good things that can be done, including in Italy. What's happening there?
So in Italy, the drug regulatory authority there collects funds from pharmaceutical companies based on what they, the amount of money they spend on drug promotion in the country, and they pool all of that money together and review research that would never be done by a pharmaceutical company, and that's a peer-reviewed open research. And so some of the things they fund are head-to-head comparisons of drugs. And that's very important because when making a decision about what drug to use, the regulatory authority will approve it if it's a placebo-controlled trial, but if you have to decide between one drug and another, you really need a head-to-head comparison. And those have been government-funded typically and not funded by the drug companies. And there are drugs for macular degeneration, which differ in price by 50 and 2,000 US dollars, and that research funded in Italy showed there was no difference in efficacy or safety of those drugs, so why not use the less expensive one?
Thank you very much.
Welcome.